Welcome to 2.3 Research Ethics. I'm Rachel Alloway, your presenter. Much of research is regulated, and there are many aspects of research that have some kind of oversight or regulation associated with them, such as animals or the use of biohazardous substances. Human subjects is a key part of this regulation, and in medical education, human ethics review is very common. Essentially, anytime you have a human subject, then you need to go through some kind of ethics review. So let's talk a little bit about what that involves and how does it work. There are some key principles of research involving human subjects you need to be aware of. The first is respect for persons. You need to respect the autonomy of those individuals that are involved in your research so that they give free, informed and ongoing consent. And you also have a responsibility to protect those with developing impaired or diminished autonomy. Not something you normally encounter in medical education, but you still need to be aware of it. You need to be concerned for the welfare of the individuals who are involved in your research, and more specifically, the impact on their physical, mental, and spiritual health, as well as their physical, economic, and social circumstances. You also need to be attentive to the justice issues in terms of being fair, so that you treat everyone with equal respect and concern, and there's a sense of equity in your research, that there is an equal distribution of benefits as well as the burdens of research participation. Now, the key to defining statement on this in Canada is the Tri-Council Policy Statement, or TCPS. And the Tri-Council Policy Statement is on the ethical conduct for research involving humans. There is a version from 2014, which is currently the current version, and it is available from this website, www.pre.ethics.gc.ca, part of the Government of Canada website. There is a policy document, which I very much encourage you to read, and a tutorial which we ask you to complete. In fact, you need to complete this to get what is called your TCPS2 certificate, which is often required, and certainly required at Calgary, to pass ethics review. Now, there are a number of topics within TCPS2 you should be aware of: consent and the consent process, attending to fairness and equity in research participation, issues of privacy and confidentiality in participation in research, how to manage conflicts of interest, what happens when you engage in multi-jurisdictional research, such as multi-institutional, what happens when you engage in research that involve Indigenous peoples, and particular concerns regarding qualitative research. And we'll take a look at some of the key ones from that list in a bit more detail. So the consent process is important. TCPS2 tells you about when and how you need to do it. It needs to be informed. So you need to tell the participants what the research involves, and you need to be very clear about what risks are associated with their participation in your research. And the individuals you engage need to be free to decline to participate, or are able to withdraw their participation at any time without penalty. You also need to be aware of when you don't need to, or there may be reasons that you don't engage in consent. So, for instance, sometimes consent is not practical. That if you have tens of thousands of participants who give small amounts of data, then it may be impossible to actually get them all to consent. So that the scale of the subject of the study may be prohibitive to making this practical, or that the subjects need to be unaware they're being observed, particularly medical students. If it's important that they give you authentic responses, that you don't want to be telling them that they are being observed or tested at a particular time, since that's very likely to skew their responses. And again, TCPS2 sets out the conditions and your responsibilities for engaging participants that have consent and do not have consent. In terms of fairness and equity, you need to be attentive to appropriate inclusion and inappropriate exclusion of research subjects, so that you are not excluding anybody on the basis of culture, language, religion, race, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, linguistic proficiency, gender, or age, unless there is a very valid key research reason for why that's happening. So if you are particularly looking at a minority, then that's a good reason for excluding others. But don't exclude people on the basis that it's inconvenient, make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate if they are eligible as a subject for the kind of work you're doing. In terms of privacy and confidentiality, they need to be attentive to privacy, the right to be free from intrusion or any kind of interference, and the right to control information about oneself, so that involves consent and also withholding consent if an individual decides to do so, and for removing information if it can be identified to them. You need to be considerate of confidentiality, protecting information from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, modification, loss, or theft, so that you only you just record the data you need for your research purposes. You don't use it for other purposes. You don't give it to anybody else. You don't allow it to be misrepresented, and so on. You need to be attentive to the security of the data and information that you collect, and to make sure that it cannot be accessed by others inappropriately. You need to be attentive to what is identifiable, and really the minimal amount of identifiable information should be used, and if it's entirely anonymous, the better. And you also need to be attentive to what's called secondary use of identifiable information for research purposes, which means that you have to go back to the Research Ethics Board if you want to do research on data that was originally collected for some other purpose. And again, TCPS2 talks you through the steps and the issues concerned with each of these 5 areas. Now, when you engage with the Research Ethics Board, an REB, which is also sometimes called an Institutional Review Board, IRB, or an Independent Ethics Committee, an IEC, and so on. They may have different names, but they are called REBs at Calgary. And those REBs are responsible for maintaining the research ethics standards, primarily through reviewing research proposals and monitoring the ongoing conduct of those research initiatives. Now, the University of Calgary has 2 REBs, one called the Conjoint Health Research Ethics Board, or CREB, and that's applicable to kinesiology, to medicine, and to nursing. And then there's the Conjoint Faculties Research Ethics Board, or the CFREB, that applies to everybody else. So, for instance, if you're from medicine, then you work with CREB. If you're from veterinary medicine, then you work with the CFREB. Now, there is the question about whether your study does indeed need any kind of REB review. If it's for research, then it almost certainly does need full review, but it may not do if it's purely for program evaluation, audit, or innovation purposes. For instance, if you're not going to publish data, although that's not the only criterion. There is a service called ARECI that offers training, tools, and support to assist project leads in organizations in assessing and mitigating ethical risks, and to understand to what extent you will or will not have to apply for full ethics review. And the URL for that website is provided here. And it's a very good first step, particularly if you're working with CREB, to get a sense of whether they actually need to see your full proposal. Now, when you do submit for REB review, you do it through a system called IRIS, the Institutional Research Information Services Solution, and that's the URL there. You need to be registered to the system to be able to use it. It includes many templates and guides to support you. But when you put a new application for a project in, you need to fill in a number of areas. You need to talk about the study staff, who's going to do it, the funding, where it's going to happen. You need to give an overview of the study itself. You need to give careful attention to the risks and benefits associated with being involved in this project. You need to say exactly who's going to participate in it, what recruitment is going to be involved, and what form of informed consent are you going to engage in. You need to describe your research methods and the procedures. You need to be clear about your data privacy and confidentiality, and the way that you have got documentation to support all of these components. When your proposal is reviewed, which only happens when you have a complete application in, and there's what's called administrative review, which is making sure that you've got your application complete before that it goes into the full review process. There are essentially 3 outcomes. It may just be approved straight away. That's relatively rare, but it would be very nice if that happens. It may be outright rejected, which again is rare, but it will be an indication that the project, and there will be a rationale given along with that, say why the project actually fails under ethics. The most common outcome, however, is that you'll be asked to amend aspects of your protocol to meet the requirements of TCPS2 and for the appropriate REB you'll be submitting to. And essentially what will happen is you make those changes, resubmit it, and you keep doing that until the REB is happy with the project you've got described. And all of that happens through the IRIS system at the University of Calgary. Once you have your project approved, then you have a number of responsibilities that go along with that. You have to follow the approved study design with any changes that were made to get through ethics. You need to make sure that everybody who's working on the project is aware of the ethics process and the revised version, and of research ethics in general. And it's a good idea that everybody takes the TCPS2 tutorial. You need to make sure that you complete it within the allotted time or apply for an extension. You need to submit any changes you make to the study design to the REB for approval. You need to report any significant problems or issues you had running the project, particularly associated with human participants. And you need to provide a final report on how the study was executed, what happened as you did it, again, particularly with regard to the human participants in it. And you should always model robust ethical principles throughout all of the work that you do. So in summary, you need to engage in what's called responsible inquiry. That's being attentive to the ethical dimensions of the work that you're doing. You should be clear about the principles of research involving human subjects, and you should read and undertake the tutorial for the Tri-Council policy statement on research involving human subjects. There's a consent process you need to be attentive to. You need to be attentive to fairness and equity in research participation. And you need to be attentive to issues of privacy and confidentiality regarding the data that you collect. You'll have to take this most likely, or at least engage it some way with the Research Ethics Board, and at Calgary that's either CREB or the CFREB. The ethics review is undertaken through a system called IRIS at the University of Calgary, and this sets out a whole series of responsibilities that you need to be attentive to, not just in applying for ethics, but in conducting your research. I hope that's been useful in terms of looking at the kinds of work that you're going to do and taking it through some kind of ethical review process. And we look forward to seeing you in the SHERI course.